Hayato is only truly happy in the air.
Let's go!
Even if it means being put in harm's way.
Yeehaw!
His reckless nature may put his teammates at risk.
Guys, help me!
These roads intersect, on each one I reflect. These lines write my story.
Welcome everyone. I am One True Brick, bringing you yet another LEGO Exo-Force review. This is set number 7705, Gate Assault. It's the largest set of the Winter 2006 wave. It was released for $30 and had 402 pieces. If you're looking to purchase it nowadays, expect to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 to $50. So out of all of the sets, this one has probably seen the greatest markup in terms of price. But I actually think $40 is still probably worth its value considering the amount of stuff that you get in this set. So as you can tell from the design of this set, rather than being a very large $30 model, they instead went down the route of a playset style design. This is the first playset released for Exo-Force, but it's certainly not the last. And I actually really like how LEGO did this. They include lots of models and lots of articulation and features packed into lots of different vehicles and battle machines, meaning that honestly you get a lot more play features than you would get if you bought, say, two $15 sets, which is really nice. So these smaller models right here are called the Gate Defender and the Sentry 2, and then right here we have the R1 Rammer, and then you get a kind of gate piece that would be part of the Sentai Mountain Defense Force. Now, these would be sprinkled throughout over the course of the story. There'd be lots of them covering different bridges, but this is an example of what one of them might look like. And as you can see from the design right here, these two models are very similar to the Uplink and Sentry models I showed you a couple weeks ago. They have basically the same design in terms of functionality. You get the same amount of articulation in the arms and legs. In fact, with this one in particular, the Sentry 2, you actually get even a little bit more articulation in the arms, which is nice. They're pretty similar in design to those sets. However, you get a few extra features. With the Gate Defender, you have these wing pieces, kind of allowing you to position it so it's flying. Now, in terms of articulation, there isn't a whole lot, so the poses are pretty limited, but it's still nice seeing that extra feature. On the other hand, you get an actual handpiece built with robot arms. Now, this is a pretty common design nowadays in MOCs and even actual sets for Bionicle. Seeing this design with lots of finger articulation, but this was actually the first set in which LEGO used the design themselves, so that's pretty cool to see. You get a full range of articulation. You could have it probably running over and maybe grabbing onto the robot, maybe yanking them out of the cockpit for some play feature, and then also you get this kind of interesting cannon that you can rotate and move around. You can also rotate and move the little binocular cannon piece off to the side if you want to. And then one additional feature that it contains that the Uplink didn't was the ability to fold down the cockpit. So this is actually a fully enclosed cockpit protecting the pilot properly. Now, the Sentry 2 is pretty similar to the actual original Sentry. The foot design and the build is essentially the same, just in a different color. You do, however, get these nice Knight's Kingdom shoulder pieces in dark red, which I believe is exclusive to the set, so nice mocking potential there. In addition to that, there's some nice parts usage here. These pieces on the shoulders, these armor pieces, are actually Jack Stone and City motorcycle front pieces, so they would actually slide over the top of a motorcycle and give it kind of a bit of a bulk, and I appreciate the parts usage here, you reusing that piece to create that armor look to it. In addition to that, the Sentry 2 has an extra piece of posability up here with kind of a rocket launcher that you can position, but honestly I would keep it staying right here as I would with the wings for the Gate Defender. Of course, with the pros of these sets, you also get the same cons as the Sentry and the Uplink model, in that these antennae have a likelihood to get knocked off. Thankfully, most of the rest of the set is pretty stable in build, but keep in mind, especially with this one right here, this one's in a different color, gray. This one will be hard to replace, so I recommend keeping an eye on those if you're storing them or moving them around so that they don't get lost. Moving on to probably the most interesting vehicle for Exo-Force of the year is the R1 Rammer. This vehicle features 2 iron drones. The one in the front is actually not attached by any studs. He just kind of sits in there and has the cannon above him to keep him from kind of falling out a little bit. And then this actually includes a major play feature, which I will show in a minute, but in addition to being able to roll around, you can rotate the cannon in pretty much any direction you'd like to. And this was also the first set to feature 2 iron drones on one vehicle, so it's more of a carrier type of vehicle. You have the pilot and the gunner as well. So moving on to the larger portion of this set, the gate. This is the biggest play aspect of the set, so you can have these 2 robot battle machines kind of running up and attacking it. Meanwhile, the gate defender and the gunner up here is trying to defend it. And the interesting aspect of this design is that when you ram R1 Rammer into the front of this, it will break open the doors, and if you go far enough, it will trigger the cannon like that. So it adds a nice little play feature. I will say it is at the cost of a little bit of stability. This gate is probably the most fragile piece of Exo-Force design that I've seen. Even in comparison to some of the more weak models, this thing is really, really fragile, and I don't recommend trying to store it in one piece, as it will definitely fall apart. These rockets have a tendency to fall off, the gun up here has a tendency to fall off, and then really the only thing that's keeping it from collapsing is this one single connection point up here, and honestly, if you put enough force on it, it can collapse and break. So keep that in mind, but I think they did that on purpose in order to give it that functionality, and I think it's a decent trade-off. It just means being more careful when you're storing the design. This set probably has some of the most unique connections that I've seen in terms of design, along with having the nice hand build right here. You can also see these cannons right here have some interesting connection points. I'm going to shine a little bit of light on it. There is a piece right here that is essentially a Technic pin spacer. Until later on in like 2015 they did a different one. Up until then, this was kind of the only Technic pin spacer, but it actually has a stud on both sides. So LEGO is once again using that design where they have a LEGO stud being placed into a pinhole, which is very interesting. And I like how they're kind of breaking up the mold when designing that. There's also a lot of snot techniques throughout the course of the build. You've got all these pillars coming up, and then they kind of rotate, and you've got another mounted piece up here, and it's just very nice design. It gives it a nice aesthetic. Probably the most interesting aspect, and I was actually quite surprised that LEGO actually did this. I didn't know until I got the set that this was even possible, but on this cannon up here, there are binocular pieces slid into this gear piece right here, and I didn't actually realize it was possible to attach them, and I think this is probably the only set that LEGO ever did this in, but nonetheless, it is a very nice design and a nice mocking potential to keep in mind when you are designing your own stuff. So I think the designer who did that did a very nice job. So I would be remiss to not mention the alternative models. So one of the greatest appeals of every Exo-Force set are its alternative models, and this set is no exception. It probably has one of the most interesting alternative models because it actually helps name one of the characters in the set, and as you can see right here, this is the model that you can build with it. If I can get that in frame. Move these guys off to the side right here. So this allows you to build Swift and Blockade Bulldozer, and it was actually revealed at a point through contact with one of the creators that the little guy up here, the minifigure up there, his character's name is in fact Swift. So I thought that was kind of interesting that those builds show that. This is also probably my favorite set to actually change into the alternative model. Most of the other ones, they have a nice build design, but this one especially probably had the most creative way of using different pieces and parts to create two very interesting builds with the aircraft and an actual literal robot bulldozer. So I thought that was pretty cool. Now, of course, I would be remiss not to mention the minifigures. This set is loaded with minifigures, whereas most of the other sets we've seen so far contain one. Occasionally, sets later on would contain two. This set, being only $30, contains 5. So you get 2 human minifigures, and then 3 Iron Drones. So I'm going to quick show you the Iron Drones before I move on to the human pilots. But right here, pretty standard Iron Drone, same as the one that you see in the Sentry, and the same build as the Devastators have. It has points of articulation in the shoulders, in the hands, in the hips, and then unfortunately no articulation in the head. Once again, keep in mind if you are mocking that you would have to think of an interesting way to attach these drones if you want to have them sitting down, as they don't have any studs on the back. And then all 3 of these Iron Drones do not have an axle piece in the head to give it that eye look, which is interesting and still baffles me to this day as to why certain ones have that piece in there and others don't. But moving on to the human pilots, we have right here Hayato, and then of course, as I named him previously, Swift. And both of them actually contain several just recolors or the same pieces as other sets. So unfortunately, these 2 guys kind of got the short end of the stick when it came to designing their minifigures. Actually, the only really entirely new piece here is Hayato's face piece. The torso and hair for Hayato are taken from other sets. The red hair piece is just a recolor of Ryo or Takeshi's hair, and then the torso is actually exactly the same as Hikaru's torso piece. So aside from the head, there really isn't anything new. And then of course, you get the dynamic pose with both sides. And Hayato is really the most cheerful character in the story. He's the most easygoing member of the Exo-Force team. So actually both of his faces look pretty cheerful. One of them's grinning. One of them, while still shouting, is still a pretty friendly expression. Moving on to Swift's character. Swift uses the same torso and leg design as Ryo does, so it's actually the same exact piece. And then the hair is just a black recolor of Hikaru's hair, and then in addition to that, his face is actually the same as Hikaru's as well, the only difference being, and this is why I didn't really call this a new piece entirely, his face is actually the exact same face as Hikaru's, the only difference being that it does not have the sunglasses kind of visor going on. So it's actually pretty much the same piece. So with this set, unfortunately, the sizable number of minifigures means that they didn't get as many unique redesigns, but I still like how many minifigures you get in this set. Overall, you get a really nice amount of parts and minifigures for the price that you're paying. Even if you're buying it in a used market for about $10 to $15 markup, I still think this is probably one of the best deals of the wave that you can get. So one of the things that I like to do when looking over these sets is to consider their story significance. And honestly, out of all of them, this one probably has the least. It was only featured in a couple comics, I believe, and so the story surrounding them is pretty limited. Hayato does tend to get some more storyline in the later half of the year, but that's not in this battle machine. The only thing that's really notable is that this battle machine that he had was used for a very long period of time, actually into the next year, in the Golden City era of Exo-Force, and I do believe this is because he probably damaged or completely destroyed other battle machines, as he has a tendency to do. The character really enjoys flying, and as a result he puts himself in a lot of danger and has a tendency to need repairs quite often. So that's why even in that later year when he had several larger battle machine options, he still ended up using this one. Something else to note, a nice little feature. Unfortunately, they didn't do this with the torso. I wish this torso piece had the O1 changed to an O2, but it doesn't. However, the shoulder armor right here says AO2, and if you've watched my Stealth Hunter video, you'll know the A stands for air. And so this is the second air unit battle machine that Exo-Force designed. And then the final aspect of unique story-related content to this is that the R1 Rammer here, this vehicle right here, was the only battle machine of this era to have wheels. So it was the only ground-based rolling vehicle. The rest of them either had legs or flew or both. So I found that to be kind of interesting to know. So if you liked this review, thank you very much. Please leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next video. I might be taking off a week to kind of get the next wave of sets built up, because this is the final set in this wave, but either next week or 2 weeks from now, I will see you guys. Thanks! Bye! The way that this weapon is designed, it has a lot of slide to this. I would consider moving this piece to another position on the axle to give it a little bit more